Let's get this out of the way first. I loved Dolly. And apparently that puts me in the minority. The critics have been unkind. The Rotten Tomatoes score, for whatever that's worth, well... And the audience reviews are all over the place. People are calling it stupid and pointless and nothing new. One user on Plex even called it terrible and recommended nobody watch it. But the exact things people are trashing this movie for are the reasons I think it's one of the most refreshing horror films I've seen in years. Slight change of pace today, folks. We are going to have ourselves a little chit-chat. And if the algorithm just picked up on that, I'm talking to my friends right now. Go fuck yourself. Real badass. I whispered it. I think at least some of you would agree with me. Originality in horror movies is becoming a rare event lately. I think some of you would also agree with me. People are getting way too comfortable with these movies constantly explaining themselves. And as a lifelong fan of horrors, I'm genuinely grateful movies like the one we're looking at today exist, even if that means I'm defending something that everyone else hates. I'm getting soft in my old age. Especially if that means I'm defending something everyone else hates. For a genre built entirely on the fear of the unknown, if you think about it, modern horror has actually become one of the safest spaces in cinema. We all know the rules, and we know the structures, and we know the first act introduces the threat, and the second act escalates it, and the third act explains everything we've just watched. We know the villain has a backstory, we know the trauma has to be processed, and we know there needs to be a thematic takeaway. And I certainly know this because it's kind of what I do every week on this channel. As I see it, the horror industry has been obsessed lately with what one film scholar refers to as known unknowns. We might not know exactly when the jump scare is coming, but we all know it's coming eventually. We might not know the killer's full backstory at the start of the movie. By the time the credits roll, we'll probably know more about their childhood than half of us remember about our own. And as two things can be true at the same time, I still love the concept of elevated horror and the exploration of grief and trauma through the pre-established genre frameworks we're also completely familiar with at this point. But to me, somewhere along the lines, the term elevated has become synonymous with over-explanation. For whatever reason, the movie's most shocking and scary moments always have to justify themselves, and the monster has to represent something, and the violence has to have some kind of point. And when movies do come along that refuse to play by those rules and just dare to be unpleasant and brutal and unexplained, people complain the movie didn't explain itself enough, as if that's some kind of a bad thing. And I think the critical reaction to Dolly says a lot more about us as audiences than it does about the movie itself. We've been trained to expect answers. We want to know where our monster comes from. We want the metaphor broken down and dissected. We want to be able to leave the theater and explain to our friends what the movie was about, because if we can explain it, we've mastered it. That means we're no longer unsettled. But I think horror, at its best, shouldn't be making you feel safe and comfortable. It should be making you feel dirty and confused and unsettled in a way that you shouldn't necessarily be able to articulate. Allow me to introduce you to Dolly. Written, directed, and produced by Rod Blackhurst, the film follows a couple whose hiking trip goes horribly wrong when they stumble across the territory of Dolly, who's a masked, deranged figure who brutally mutilates the boyfriend Chase, played by Seann William Scott, before capturing the girlfriend, Macy, played brilliantly by Fabienne Therese, and forcing her to live with Dolly as her baby. The film wears its influences proudly. Shot on glorious grainy 16mm stock, it plays like a lost 70s grindhouse flick, channeling the filthy, vibrant spirit of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I do not say that lightly as a diehard Texas Chainsaw fan. The film gives us zero backstory. There is no explanation for why Dolly is the way she is. There's no trauma to unpack. There's just carnage. And for a change, it doesn't care if you want a reason for the carnage because you're just not getting any. Thank the fucking horror gods. But I think all these negative reviews have completely missed something vital. Under all the mayhem and the wild pacing and the brutality that makes your hands involuntarily shoot up to your face, this movie is actually delivering 5 very specific things that you should want in your horror film. First, and I am not saying this lightly either, in a genre that's been recycling the same villains for decades, Max Lindsay's physical performance gives us something we haven't had in a very long time. A monster who feels instantly and permanently iconic. Between the mask and the silence and the character's unreadable essence and her terrifying physicality, I'm talking Leatherface level iconic. The kind of villain that people should still be talking about 20 years from now. And I think Dolly deserves to stand amongst all those greats. And I will die on that hill. Next, in this era of weightless CGI blood and obvious digital effects, Dolly goes all in on practical gore, and you can feel it sticking to your fingers from the opening frames. One reviewer called it the kind of film that makes you regret having a stomach, and that's not hyperbole. There's a tactility to practical effects that digital just can't replicate. It lingers different, and it feels real in a way that really gets under your skin. Next, Fabian Therese's character Macy endures a punishing, relentless nightmare rivaling, if not surpassing, that of Sally Hardesty. And throughout her punishing nightmare, she remains determined and strong and resourceful and defiant and weirdly calm. She's not waiting to be saved, and she's not defined by her trauma. She just survives with a screaming resilience that feels entirely earned and deserves recognition. And in a landscape where final girls are often either superhuman or just reduced to trauma metaphors, Macy's just a person fighting to hold on to her ears, and she's extraordinary. Next, I do all my own color grading and filming for my videos, so I know how much effort goes into nailing a specific look. Most modern movies attempting vintage just throw a digital layer of noise on top of the too crisp footage and call it a day. But Blackhurst shot this on actual 16mm film stock, and it shows. The grain is real, and that means the textures are real too. That makes the grindhouse aesthetic completely convincing. This isn't a filter you're watching, this is filmmaking craft. Fifth and finally, and this is the one that ties everything together, Dolly never, ever explains itself. Not the killer, not the violence, not the bizarre, shocking plot. Not one single aspect. And that refusal isn't a bug. It's the entire point. Because the instant you explain the killer's trauma, the moment you give them a sympathetic backstory, they cease to be terrifying. They become manageable and even sad. And sad is not scary. Dolly isn't interested in making you feel good about being scared. It's not gonna give you a neat thematic bow to tie everything up with. It is going to be grim and grotesque and violent, and it's gonna leave you sitting in all of those things at the end. The academic term for what Dolly is doing is defamiliarization. It is taking something familiar and making it strange again. And horror is uniquely suited to this type of thing because it's by far the most self-reflexive genre. We are all very familiar with the countless tired tropes and the endless repeatable story patterns, but when a movie like Dolly comes along and just refuses to explain itself, it forces you to sit in that uncomfortable feeling instead of intellectualizing or rationalizing your way out of it. And to me, that's what makes this movie so watchable. It's fucked up. I've read the negative reviews, and I've seen people say the film is underbaked and lacks substance, and that it's boring and not very scary, and that it has nothing new going on. But I want to take a moment to say fuck you to that, because nothing new is a weird criticism for a movie that's being criticized for being weird and extreme and refusing to follow the rules. I think these negative reviews are really saying it's not offering the kind of newness we've been conditioned to expect. And that, in itself, is scary. It's not reimagining the genre, and it's not delivering a clever twist. It's not offering a message to walk away with. It's just horror. Pure, unadulterated, mean-spirited horror. The kind that exists for its own sake, and the kind that's served up just for us supposed horror fans. And I get why it doesn't work for everyone. I get why people want more. But I also think there's value in a movie that knows exactly what it is and doesn't pretend to be anything else. So here's my challenge to you, folks. Whether you love Dolly or not, the next time a movie frustrates you, the next time you walk out feeling like something didn't make sense or the director didn't explain it enough, ask yourself, is that really what's going on? Or am I just feeling uncomfortable? Because we need films that make us feel uncomfortable. We need films that are strange and extreme and confusing. Not every movie needs to be an allegory. Not every villain needs a tragic backstory. I don't need to sit down and convert a film's message every single week on this channel. Sometimes horror just needs to be horrifying. And sometimes we just need to be afraid. And we don't need to know why. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting Dolly is a perfect horror film. The plot is thin, and the characters, with the exception of Macy, who's perfect, the characters are only developed enough for you to understand who they are and why they're there. But sometimes that's exactly what I want. Sometimes I just want nasty and grim and unapologetic. Sometimes I want a movie that doesn't give a shit if I understand it or not. And if I'm being honest, I don't understand Dolly, which is probably why it's been stuck in my head since I virtually watched it with my horror pal a few weeks ago. And for the record, she loved it as well. If you've seen any of my videos, you'll know I don't just encourage differing opinions on these movies. I live for differing opinions and the expression of those differing opinions on my channel. With the exception of my best pal, Karl. I know, he's adorable. None of my friends are even into horror movies, which is why I get so much out of talking to you guys. But for the first time in I don't know how long, I wish there was actually fewer differing opinions. I wish more people felt the way I feel about Dolly. And I am getting soft in my old age. Until next time, folks.